Okay, so welcome along to COVID-19 Heroes and Villains, a topical debate with four business leaders, well, three and me, and from all over the country. And we're really looking forward to about 3/4 of an hour of really topical debate. Now, before we get going, I am going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. I'm going to go with how it looks on my screen. So Nick, top left, can I ask you to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, certainly. I'm Nick Bramley. I'm the CEO of Impactus Group. I'm based in York, where I live. We've got offices in York, Leeds and London.
And thank you. And Sarah, can I ask you, please?
Yeah, so I'm Sarah Sweeney Marshall from the northeast of England. I'm currently operations manager for a sales and retention department within the utility sector.
Fantastic. And Precious?
Hi Keith, thank you for having me. My name is Precious Zumbika Luanga. I am a business owner, so I am a partner at Queensbury Consulting, which is a multi-disc consultancy business, and I'm also a director in my own PR comms business. I'm based in Milton Keynes.
Thank you, thank you. And Keith Rosell, I run Sales Marvel. I've been in corporate sales for 30 years. And I'm now a sales trainer. So anyway, everyone, welcome along to this program. As I say, we've got a fixed running order, which we agreed in advance. And so, Nick, can I ask you to present your case, please?
Yeah, we were asked to look at heroes and villains of the COVID crisis and some comments around that. The villains are easy, I think, and it didn't take a lot of thinking about for me. I'm going to take you back to the very first day of lockdown. And my villain of the piece is Mike Ashley from Sports Direct. Now, as a Middlesbrough fan, it's nothing to do with him owning Newcastle, and a lot of Newcastle fans would make him a villain of the piece for other reasons. He's a villain of the piece for me from a leadership perspective, which is things that I'm really interested in. And I think the way he runs his business and the practices he puts in place and the 0-hour contract and the really terrible work environments that he's created for his team in what can only be described as a bullying format have never sat well with me, particularly as somebody who works with, enlightened organisations looking at leadership. And, whilst that is regrettable and he's worse than many, but not the only one in that particular field of, maximising the revenues at the expense of some of his staff, the thing that made him a real villain for me was the day lockdown was announced and we were told what could stay open, what couldn't stay open, hospitality closed overnight, etc. And literally retail the same. And Mike Ashley had the absolute audacity to make a case for the fact that he was an essential business. Now, it was based on the fact that if we're going to be locked down at home with an hour's exercise, we sell bicycles and training shoes and gym kit. I don't know that makes them an essential business. We were talking about people who are providing food and food banks for people who were, starving, and him selling, training shoes that were imported from dubious practices of how they were manufactured does not make him an essential business in any case. He read the crest of the negative PR wave for about 5 or 6 days before relenting. And I think that's how he runs his business. I think he'll take a decision, take a litmus test of the response to his decision in terms of public sort of deniability or whatever he chooses, and then say, is it worth taking and continuing? He didn't think it was worth continuing, and he's probably done very well online because a couple of his competitor businesses have actually shut down or gone into receivership as a result of COVID. So Mike Ashley will get stronger. Mike Ashley will his business will get bigger. But I just think it's the arrogance and audacity of the guy in terms of his leadership style and then how he promotes the business as in that way. And it just even though it was months ago, it just never sat comfortably with me right throughout the COVID crisis. So he's my villain.
Fantastic. And I think you wanted to talk on the contrary around a heroic behaviour as well.
I do indeed. I want to talk about heroic leadership, but I want to pick out someone who has generally been seen as an absolute beacon of positivity and hope and decision making, etc. And it won't surprise anyone if I'm describing this person as that. And it is Jacinda Ardern from New Zealand. She's obviously the Prime Minister of New Zealand. Lots of people have responded in such a positive fashion to how she and her government, under her leadership, have handled the whole COVID-19 crisis. And whilst I accept that they are fairly isolated, they are a fairly small community if you exclude the sheep, and sheep outnumber, people about 17 to 1, I think, across New Zealand. And she had an opportunity to do the right thing quickly. It's her decision making, it's the decisiveness of the actions that they've taken for me that makes her fairly sort of stand out in terms of how heroic she's been. And what I'll say to you about that is, very early in the process, she took a decision to lock down, strictly lock down all of the islands at New Zealand, to such an extent that their numbers of recorded cases were very low. But it's actually the reaction to when adversity kicks in. So a couple of days ago, they had their first cases of COVID that were recorded after 102 days. 0 cases for 102 days, suddenly 4 cases in a small cluster in Auckland. She responded by shutting down the entire islands again very quickly, putting isolation measures in place, just so that we can break the back of these 4, and these 4 don't multiply. Now, isolated, yes. Small community, yes. Small business community, yes. Easy to do, absolutely yes. But it's still decisive management, leadership, active, action-based outcomes that have been quite inspiring. Could she have done that elsewhere, with different geography? Possibly not had the same results, but I don't doubt for 1 minute she'd have taken the same types of decisive actions. So for that reason, for heroic leadership, Jacinda Ardern is my heroic leader.
Yeah, good shout. Good shout. So I wonder, Sarah or Precious, I wonder how you feel about what Nick has been discussing.
I agree with both the points that you've made. With Mike Ashley at the beginning, I think he got a lot of bad publicity, but I think it was completely deserved for the actions he took. And again, for the work in New Zealand, it's been absolutely phenomenal. To get 102 days COVID free is absolutely amazing compared to what's happening around the globe. Yeah, I think they're both really, really good people that you've chose.
Thank you.
I think I'll echo what Sarah and Nick have said, Keith. I think Mike Ashley is an example of definitely bad leadership, in my opinion. I think riding on bad press for 5 days is not echoing the care and the need of the people that are making you the money, the employees.
I would also say that, Precious, sorry to interrupt. I would also say that if that press had died down after 5 days, I think it would have stayed open.
I do as well.
Absolutely.
I think you're absolutely right. But I also wonder, sorry to cut across, I also wonder if people like Mike Ashley, I heard this phrase a long time ago, the unacceptable side or the unacceptable face of capitalism. That's been attributed to a few people over the years. Tiny Rowlands, who used to run Long Row. I'm guessing only 2 of us are old enough to perhaps remember that name.
I remember the name.
No doubt. Yeah, all right, Precious. But also Sir Philip Green has come, we're not mentioning him today, but has come in for that kind of. But I wonder if people like Mike Ashley actually thrive in some perverse way on this kind. There's no such thing as bad publicity. It was once said, and I wonder if that's a factor. They actually just kind of bask in it somehow. It's not acceptable under any terms for me. But I also wonder, where was HR in all of this?
Well, I'm not sure.
I think, yeah.
Whatever seat at their table at the board, I suspect Mike Ashley's business, I don't know to be true, so I'm not going to make an outright claim, but I suspect that it's the kind of business where HR doesn't have a seat at the board and HR is purely a people function. Those businesses that are more enlightened, HR is usually a board appointed position. And yeah, I suspect that's not the case at Sports Direct. I may be wrong, but I suspect, you know, if I was a betting man, I'd probably go 80-20 in my favour on that one.
Yeah,
I
Precious.
just really want to comment on Jacinda, to be honest with you. I think Mike Ashley has had enough airtime for today. I just really want to focus on Jacinda, because I think that for me, and I speak as a female in leadership, I think that she, not taking the gender side, but I think that she showed true leadership. Decisiveness is probably one of the things that I will talk about when I come on. Was very, very key, and she showed that being decisive actually pulls results. 102 days in a pandemic with no new cases is record-breaking work. So hats off to Jacinda, absolutely, with the baby in tow as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
Hats off to her.
She's got a lot on her plate, hasn't she?
No, she's managing.
Okay, right, thanks for that. So, no, really well said, Precious. You know, balancing literally many different dynamics that's going on.
I suspect she surrounded herself with talent as well, by the way. I suspect it's not down to her, and she's pretty humble when it comes to, you know, she's quite quick to give praise to other people. And I think she's quite quick to acknowledge where other people in her team, I guess her cabinet, have you know, taken ownership and made a difference. So you know, she's got a lot of, she's a case study in waiting for one of my future leadership programs, shall we say, you know, on the good side.
I look forward to her appearing on your podcast one day. Having said that, there is something you know, remarkable about Kiwis and New Zealanders. I remember being on a flight a long time ago, sat next to, I struck up a conversation with a female New Zealander. It was Helen Clark, who I later found out was the Prime Minister of New Zealand. And I was just sat on a plane, very humble, and it was really interesting about that kind of leadership, really refreshing. And I was embarrassed when I found out afterwards. You know, shame on me. Now, Sarah, I think you had a question resulting out of governmental leadership.
Yeah, so kind of takes us in nicely to how do we think that our acting government's done over the course of COVID.
Interesting comeback, actually. That it's. Can I take this, because I used Jacinda as my sort of heroic leader? Can I start this, if that's okay? I've got two sides to the coin, really. I think the decisiveness was hugely, for me, was hugely impressive in the very early days when they said, we're going to put a package of measures together to make sure the economy does not fall off a cliff. And those measures were rolled out quickly, efficiently. They weren't always thought through because they were working, you know, on the fly in some respects, but they were looking and saying, where's the biggest risk here? You know, to introduce a furlough scheme and to introduce, you know, tax support and small business support, etc., as quickly and efficiently as they did. For me, I was really impressed with that reaction. I'm slightly concerned that, you know, my great-grandchildren will be still paying for it, you know, when I'm long gone, but that's just an economic outcome of what we had. So on one side, the decisiveness to support the economy was, for me, impressive. And yet then the lack of decisiveness when it comes to clarity of message from central government has frustrated the living daylights out of me throughout the entire process. You know, when it was stay at home, we all understood what stay at home was. Then it became stay alert. A lot of people don't even know what that means. And, oh, I'm alert, which means I'm awake. Control the virus. You can't control a virus. It's not something you can control. So when they changed the message, which seems to be about June time, everyone was confused. And there was lots of comedians saying, you know, go to work if you can, but if you can't go to work, don't do so. Wear a mask on public transport. They're all, you know, do we wear a mask? Do we not wear a mask? Why did you start wearing masks in July? Why didn't we start wearing masks in March? So there was a lot of confusion on one side with clarity of message, and yet decisive action from, you know, the certainly the financial support for the UK economy.
Yeah, good shout. Sarah, do you want to come in on that?
So for me, I agree. So that when the message changed, it was almost like the kind kind of the whole plan wasn't communicated or not communicated properly. It was like drip fed over a couple of days, which I think it made a lot of the community confused, really.
Yeah.
They weren't clear on what they needed to do or what they could do. And it caused a lot of upset across the country.
Precious.
Yeah. For me, I think the business response, the response to businesses economically, I think I'll echo what Nick said. It was good. I think it was needed. They were giving comfort, but equally the messaging for different types of organizations was confused. So people didn't know whether or not, companies didn't understand the furlough system at the beginning. They finally got to understand it. And, do we lay off? Do we not lay off? Et cetera, et cetera. All that mixed messaging, I think, had impacted businesses at a local level. From central government, it looked very organized in terms of comms, but in terms of actually implementation, I think that's where it fell off a little bit, because people were not empowered with information to actually implement it within their organizations. I won't delve too much into the health side because that's part of my conversation, but certainly from an economic point of view, I think it was decisiveness. I think also it was impacted by the fact that it was central government making that decision. So it was one flow of information from with one message. So that was done quite well.
I think there was a bit of a swan syndrome as well, though, wasn't there? Trying to portray on the surface, some level of calm. And so, Rishi would announce something on the stand on a Tuesday about, sort of furlough. And you can imagine hundreds and hundreds of people, civil servants, behind the scenes, peddling like mad to think, right, we have to, he's given us a headline. The world's reacted well to that headline. We now have to work out the implementation. Wouldn't fancy being a civil servant on those early days at all.
No, and all of a sudden they're kind of making policy on the fly. And I'm inclined to cut them just a little bit of slack, certainly for the early days and what they were, because, we're probably all fatigued by all the superlatives that we used around that time, extraordinary, unprecedented, all of those kind of words. But, it truly was all those kind of words, extraordinary, never before, Spanish flu, all of those analogies, if you like. But it does seem as though they really set the bar high, particularly in 72 hours of lockdown, 5 p.m. communications. I really felt informed, even though, yes, it was shocking, scary almost, for sure, and particularly for, I would say, for young ones and young children that perhaps just don't understand that message. But it seems as though from an economic standpoint, I just wonder if there's a bit of a Marshall Plan dynamic to all of this. Nick, you very sensibly mentioned that grandchildren are going to be paying for this. Unfortunately, I think that's the case. I think it was unavoidable that we've got to do something, because otherwise we cause so many other difficult things. Scarring is something we've heard lots about recently. But anyway, really good points. Thank you very much. Precious, if I may, that's going to hopefully be a real nice segue onto, almost like we planned it, almost onto your conversation. So can I ask you to lead the next piece, please? Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Keith. So this is just literally following on from, messaging, decisiveness, and in terms of leadership. So for me, my review on COVID heroes and villains, I didn't necessarily look at people. I looked at organizations and the impact the pandemic had on society, with particular focus on blame culture and marginalization. So COVID-19 was misunderstood. Many jurisdictions responded to it very differently. New Zealand, we've just spoken about, she made a really great decisions quite earlier on. Italy, Spain fall in the same bracket, in my opinion, as the UK. It was misunderstood. So the response to COVID was much slower than New Zealand. So what stems out of that? The villain in that is the blame culture, stemming from the response to COVID. Government was blaming other jurisdictions. Society was blaming government. We were criticizing, and I'll bring this in right now, that we were in one thread from an economic point of view. We've been saying that government was really great, decisive, etc. But society was criticizing government for their lack of a prompt response, lack of prompt decision-making and guidelines. You hear stay safe, stay alert, control the virus, like you said, Nick. But actually, people didn't know what they needed to do. Mixed messaging did not help. Public Health England was only finding out probably at the same time that everybody else in local government was finding out. So it almost seemed like a flurry of activity, everybody going in all sorts of directions, but not actually saying the same message. And I'll speak from a person in society. It was it was an anxious time. You didn't know how you were contracting it. And I sympathize with the government to some extent because they were still finding out as well. So the villain for me is definitely the lack of decision making, the lack of response to COVID, the mixed messages, and then the blame culture that then surfaced from that. The lack of trust and miscommunication as well, which leads to the second villain, which I'm going to talk about, is marginalization. In that blame culture that was happening from a government and societal point of view, there was also the blame culture within race. So I'm an advocate of BAME, I'm an advocate of ethnic empowerment, but within that, there was a thread that started within the society in the UK, almost assuming that COVID-19, people from a BAME background were more prone to COVID-19. Again, lack of direction, lack of facts from government. So people were running with their own story and making their own assumptions. And this then led to that investigation from the chief medical officer. And it came purely from that, mixed messaging. Social media was going rife with people attacking people from ethnic minorities, saying that they were the cause of COVID-19 spreading in the UK. And that stand by the Public Health England, the chief medical officer, instigating that report and instigating that stakeholder engagement and understanding of what does it actually mean? Why are we having more infections within the BAME society? Why are we having more deaths within the BAME society? It all led down to straightforward issues like systemic racism, health inequalities were a key thing that came out of it. Long-standing inequalities were exacerbated by COVID-19. COVID-19 almost unraveled what was already there. The pandemic exposed long-standing inequalities in BAME groups in the UK. Also as well, the fact that most of ethnic minorities were key workers. So you are in an environment where maybe you're living with your parents and your grandparents, which is typical in some ethnic minority groups. You're the one who's you're a key worker, either in health or in supermarkets or delivery or whatever it is. You get exposed, you bring it back home, and it will happen, linked to socioeconomic issues. So for me, response time and marginalization and blame culture are the villains of COVID-19.
That was really, really well put. And you brought up some really quite sensitive issues, which doesn't mean that we can't address them. I think we have to address them. Nick, I wonder what you've got to say about that.
I think the one thing that stands out from there is, and I really do understand the fact that COVID found a way to exploit existing problems and challenges in the BAME community that were there already. So, and also, if you look at the numbers, it's not just the BAME community as well, it's those who are, living in poverty and whatever, so it's the socio-economic situation that people were already exposed to and living in and having to cope with on a day-to-day basis, that when COVID got access to that kind of environment, it would naturally spread quicker, and therefore the numbers were skewed, and therefore the numbers were kind of showing that the BAME community had a higher proportion, etc. But I think you've explained it really well in the fact that it probably was always going to be the case, given key workers, socioeconomic situation, traditional housing and living conditions, as a cluster of families, etc. So I think you've covered that really well. But the one thing I want to talk about, social media. I think things like Twitter, it has its place, but my goodness, it's a dangerous place to be, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's a faceless keyboard warrior place that can really, expose people to vitriolic. It's a horrible, horrible kind of place. People are posting things, death threats to people, and it's like, really, that you've posted a death threat from your keyboard, and you probably sat there, in your parents' lounge in your jogging bottoms, and where do you get the right to do that? So I think social media had a real, it fanned the flames early, didn't it? It was a horrible pressure. So, I think you've raised that really well.
Thanks, Nick. Sarah, I'd be interested for you to pick this up too.
So yeah, so the key workers for me, although they were praised, especially with the NHS and things like that, I don't think they really publicised exactly who was actually going out to work and what the working conditions were, and the risk that they put themselves in to make that happen. And obviously that did skew the numbers a lot, and that's for no fault of their own. It's because that's how they have to go to work, they have to provide, they have to do these things to live. And it's a shame that people got caught up in that it is. There's no nice way about it, is there? It was a really, really bad situation for some and not so bad for others.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Sorry, please carry on, Precious.
Yeah, no, I was going to say absolutely. Just to add to Sarah, I mean, the test and trace, the testing system at the beginning, key workers exposed.
Yeah.
PPE, key workers not exposed to not being tested. There were so many catastrophic incidences that just exacerbated the situation.
Yeah.
I mean, the decision making was one thing, but also as well, just acting really quickly. If you can act really quickly economically, yes, public health is central, and it works better if it's actually local government dealing with it. The disconnect in my mind was the fact that central government, I believe, and again, my opinion could be tested, but I've spoken to some health professionals, central government was making decisions and not engaging with local government. So you can't, if you don't engage with local government health directors, it's very difficult to actually penetrate and make localized responses that impact that society. So what's happening in London could be very different to what's happening in Blackburn or in Leeds. There is societal, there are social economic differences in Kensington as opposed to Blackburn. So, all those things, and they're cultural differences as well. So I think there were so many things, so many lessons that we now need to take going forward as a society and even as the government. If the second wave comes in, my question is, have we actually learned a lesson? And are we going to be best prepared? And actually, are we going to respond in a decisive manner, which is specific to that region and area? Because that's what the issue is.
I think I want to pick up on something very quickly. I saw something the other day saying that the government are committed to moving some very big numbers of central departments and functions out of London into the regions so that they are more in touch with the regions. And I noticed that Middlesbrough, which is an area of sort of fairly high sort of unemployment, deprivation, social economic challenges, they've put a big bid in to move government departments and people up to a development area called Middlehaven in Middlesbrough. And I just have people from Kensington and the southeast being exposed to reality. And the reality of, you mentioned Blackburn, you mentioned Leeds, you could mention any sort of northern town really. And, would a practicing government minister or their civil servant colleagues would they move, and would they even get it? Probably not. So I'm not sure that they will learn from it. I think they'll just, hopefully they will, but from a public health point of view, but maybe.
This will be the thing. So in that sense, COVID-19 has been quite an equalizer in that everyone is affected, both rich and poor. I would just, to finish off this piece, I did hear somebody much cleverer than myself, I think it was the CEO of one of the big charities, who talked about, we are all in this storm, the COVID-19 storm. However, we're not all in the same boat.
No.
Yeah.
I can't remember who said that, but anyway, I thought I'm going to steal with pride, and I put that in there. Now, hopefully, we'll just finish that off. Thank you. This has been really engaging thus far. Thank you very much. So I'm going to hand over now to Sarah, if that's okay, Sarah.
Yeah, of course.
And ask you to pick up the next line of this debate. Thank you.
Yeah. So the hero I'm going to talk about is Amazon. The main reason for choosing that is kind of personal towards the beginning of lockdown. So I had a baby boy the day that the UK peaked in COVID, which was bad planning, you could say, but you didn't know that was going to happen.
Congratulations.
Thanks. But I tried to prepare as best I can, because the beginning of lockdown, the high street stores, supermarkets didn't control people panic buying, which meant shortages. Well, we all know the toilet roll shortages, but tins of baby milk, people were going out and buying them 40 tins at a time, which made them not available to everybody else. On top of that, you couldn't get a delivery slot at the supermarket. The local pharmacies were sold out. So Amazon were the only one who was able to fulfill that order, so I could actually feed my child. So for me, for a personal reason, they were up there straight away. If I then delved a little bit deeper, the things that they did for the customers, for example, so they introduced the non-contact delivery straight away, so to make the customers as safe as they could. They introduced longer times to return your goods, because normal society wasn't working, so you couldn't just go to the post office or whatever you needed to do to return your parcel, so they extended that. On the flip side to that, coming out of it a couple of months later, they've then gave a big thank you bonus to all their frontline workers, totaling about $500 million, which is a lot of money to invest back to their people. Unemployment is at an all-time high as well again at the moment. So they actually created another 15,000 jobs, positions in their fulfillment centres and delivery drivers. So they gave back to the community as well. The increased sick pay as well for their people, which I think is really important. Why should you get penalised for something that's completely out of your control? So I thought that was really, really important. And they've invested up to $4 billion as well globally to keep their customers and their employees safe with getting the right PPE and things like that as well, which I think is really important. Community-wise, what I thought was interesting when I looked into it a bit further, they're actually committing to €21 million to everybody in Europe who's been affected by COVID, which I thought was absolutely outstanding. And they're providing disadvantaged students as well free online courses. So people who've not been able to attend the university lectures or not been able to go to secondary school or primary school, they're giving free learning back as well, which I thought was great. On the flip side of that, I think Amazon have also displayed some behaviours of a villain. So one thing that Amazon pride themselves against or talk open about is they're completely against price gouging. But if you look at the studies and things that are in place at the moment, there's reports of up to 1,000% inflation from sellers and Amazon products themselves. I know there's a lawsuit being made against them in California. But again, on a personal aspect of that, I think at the beginning of lockdown, I ended up paying £13 for a bottle of Dettol as well. So about 276% in price inflation on that for people who are in financial difficulties, who've potentially had the wages stopped, they've lost the job due to redundancy. People are actually making an absolute killing out of the consumer, which I don't think is fair. So I don't think they've done enough in that space to protect the consumer at all.
Is that Amazon trader then, Sarah? It's not Amazon themselves, they're the distribution. It's the trader under Amazon. Amazon could do something about that, couldn't they? But,
yeah. So there's reports of both Amazon products and the third parties using Amazon as well. When you look into it, Amazon have done work. I think they've suspended about 6,000 sellers' accounts to try and kind of control it, which is good. But I think they could just introduce a simple tolerance to prices that they put on to stop people doing it in the first place. Yeah. So I think there's a lot of work they could do in that space. Mm-hmm. And then when you look into it a little bit further, although Amazon are priding themselves on the thank yous and things they're giving back to their employees, the employees state that they were in really poor working conditions. The factories were really crowded. They didn't have the right PPE, the right protection. Mm-hmm. And you've got the instances in Italy and Spain as well, where they refused to close, even though there was people infected within the warehouses, which caused massive protests as well in them countries. So I think for although they were able to globally get things to consumers, which is really important in the time of need, there were things that I feel like they could have done a lot better and a little differently also.
Yeah.
Right on the money, Sarah. Thank you so much for that. Precious, do you want to come in on any of that?
Yes, absolutely, Keith. I think for me, Amazon is is an interesting beast. I mean, the model is amazing, right? So from a model point of view, business model, Mr. Bezos has got it nailed, absolutely nailed. But the villainous side of it, I actually didn't realize that all of this was happening. So this is news to me. I know that the inflation of prices was definitely happening, but the working conditions, for me, that's appalling. Given the fact that we're in a pandemic, there was a social responsibility, certainly for a giant like that, to make sure that the working environment was in a manner that it would protect people. Fair play on him, keeping deliveries going. I was a very big fan of Amazon Prime during the pandemic, during lockdown. It served me very, very well, to the point where I had to remove it as an app because I was spending more money than I should have. But yeah, no. But certainly, Claire, I mean, Sarah, I think you covered that really, really well.
Thank you.
I don't think you can mention Amazon without their checkered tax history. I think a lot of people pick up on that as a, I think it's a very good choice for personal and some operational reasons, Sarah, there. I totally get the fact that it allows you to feed your newborn and congratulations on the arrival of your newborn, but essential supplies, essential services. So you've got to give them credit there. You've got to give them credit to recognising the performance of their frontline staff. But if I was weighing up, would I class them as a hero or a villain? I think you'd look at the hero side and be cynical about, is that opportunistic? And I would look at the villain side and say, I suspect, given the characteristics of what we've heard about staff welfare, working conditions, it's probably, for me, stacking up towards kind of having a villainous DNA that took a positive advantage of an opportunity and supplied consumers with the goods that they needed. I do like the fact that they've taken some action against several thousand of their traders who were taking, profiteering to a new level. I would love to think that we'd remember this, I would love to think that as consumers will remember who were the people who took advantage. The corner shop who was buying, from Macro 24 toilet roll and then selling them individually at £1 each. And
yeah, did it with bacon as well. It's crazy. Split bacon and mark it up. Bonkers.
Yeah, I'd like to think we'd remember that. But Amazon are here to stay. Amazon are a one-touch Amazon Prime app away from you spending next month's wages, Precious. And I get the fact that they make things easy. They're easy to deal with. They've got everything you need. They're quick and responsive. As a consumer, you'd look at it and go, great. As a business, I'd still say they've got a bit of a villainous DNA for me, and that would be my view on it overall.
Yeah, I think it's a really good shout. Nick, I'm picking this up, and Amazon by no means unique in this regard on tax and tax. God, don't get me on this, but anyway, I'll try and do this in 30 seconds. But one that always comes to mind for me, I know we've been talking about Amazon, is Apple. But it's the behavior of big corporations offshoring their cash, particularly in the Channel Islands, bizarrely on our doorstep. And if we've people that run their own companies. If you got a letter from HMRC to say we're going to tax you this year, and this is how much you owe us, and it's 0.0015% of your profits, you'd probably be thinking, oh, I think you've made a mistake there. Mm-hmm. Now, that's what Amazon's effective tax rate, that's what Apple's, effective tax rate is. So that for me, the villainous side of this is, if you're making all this profit out of the UK and pick another country, 196 of them, you really ought to pay your fair share of taxes, because that's what's providing it on the roads that your drivers go on to make those deliveries. Everyone's important in that context. So that's a really, really important point. And Sarah, you've brought out a load of information that I just didn't realise about.
I didn't know much of that as well, Sarah. So that's good research. Yeah.
Yeah, and And so really thank you for that. I'm just in case I'm not responding to email here, I'm setting the clock and kind of trying to restart it, trying to create a sort of balanced and fair kind of debate for everyone. So if it's okay with you, I'm going to move on to my sort of chosen subject as if it were, and I'm going to be talking about boohoo.com. Now, Boohoo, you may recall, are facing a modern slavery investigation after workers in a Leicester factory making clothes linked to Boohoo were paid as little as £3.50 an hour. An investigation by a Sunday Times undercover journalist who worked at the factory for a couple of days was told to expect only £3.50 an hour, well below the UK minimum wage of £8.72 an hour for workers aged 25 plus. Now, the manufacturer in this instance, Jaswell Fashions, was also operating during Leicester's lockdown period without adequate social distancing arrangements being in place. And it turns out that Home Secretary Priti Patel asked the National Crime Agency some time ago, pre-COVID, to investigate reports of modern slavery, specifically in Leicester. And she recently said the conditions described in some of those factories were truly appalling, and added that the government would not tolerate sick criminals forcing innocent people into slave labour and a life of exploitation. In a statement subsequent to that, Boohoo said it would not tolerate any incidents of non-compliance, especially in relation to the treatment of workers, and said it had terminated relationships with suppliers which had been found to have broken its rules. Now, all of that sounds good on the surface of it. You know, something's happened, Boohoo have responded to it. However, in 2017, 3 years ago, Channel 4's Dispatches programme found that factories in Leicester were supplying Boohoo, were paying workers less than the minimum wage. That was 3 years ago. And at the time, Boohoo stated that the work had been subcontracted without their permission. Note, Boohoo's share price at the time was £134. In a subsequent investigation by the Financial Times in 2018, they found that labour exploitation in Leicester factories was rife, describing it as being like a country within a country, which we mentioned before on this programme, with owners ignoring employment law with seeming impunity. So Boohoo still failed to act, and the rise in its share price has been stratospheric. Boohoo's share price in 2015 was 30 pence. Its high, 52-week high in 2020, was £433, a rise of 1,400%. So not only that, but the company has established a management incentive plan that will see its founders each receive £50 million of its shares to continue to improve as they have. And the health and safety executive, wouldn't you know it, are now investigating, much too late in the process. So I kind of like, excuse me, I kind of like what Warren Buffett said in one of his famous letters to Berkshire Hathaway shareholders: there's seldom just one cockroach in the kitchen.
Yes.
He said that when management takes the low road in aspects that are visible to investors and to customers, it's likely they're following a similar path behind the scenes. Should be noted that Boohoo's share price is today £319. That's a 33% drop off its high. So the hero for me, excuse me, so I've made on the villainous behaviour, I've got that point across, but the hero for me has been Aberdeen Standard Investments. They dumped almost all of their Boohoo shares over the paying conditions scandal after describing the online retailer's response to allegations as inadequate. So my takeaways or messages are that exploiting our most vulnerable people is despicable and needs to be confronted and punished. There needs to be equal and opposite financial disincentives in the corporate system, and executives need to feel the pain. So number two, companies need to know who they're trading with, both customers and supply chain. And as someone recently put it, Get your shoes dirty, talk to workers, and visit suppliers without management being present so that workers can speak freely. Number 3, consumers need to know what's behind their $1.99 t-shirt, their disposable fashions. Some of this is happening right here, right now, on our doorstep. And number 4, we need more investors like Aberdeen Standard Investments to act with a conscience and drive investment decisions for ethical investors, which will ultimately influence the business behaviours of those firms looking for that investment.
Love that. Do you know what, Keith? I think, you know, the whole disposal of clothing, you know, is a massive contributor to some of these conditions. You know, everybody has now gotten into that space of, you know, I want something cheap. I'm going to wear it for one. I'm going to wear it once. I don't really care how much it costs, and I'll just get rid of it. And it's a societal thing. It's a societal thing that is impacting economically, and it's impacting, again, socially. All those workers that are working in these isolated factories are in there because they can be exploited for whatever reason. Maybe because they don't have the right paperwork in the UK, so they can't really speak out, or maybe because they're desperate for a job. And even worse now, with high unemployability, you're probably going to find this becoming quite an issue. And for me, these organizations that start off with a share price of 30 pence, and you move to, I can't remember your number, but in excess of £400 per share, and you continue to create environments like that because all you're worried about is how much profit are you going to put into your pockets. I think it's despicable, quite frankly. I think it's absolutely despicable. And this shouldn't be happening in the UK, it shouldn't be happening in Bangladesh, it shouldn't be happening anywhere in the world. Corporates need to be responsible about it. So where organizations like Aberdeen take a stand like that, that is the responsibility. That is the corporate social responsibility. That is taking that and living the values of organizations. I hope a lot of organizations take a leaf from that.
That's not a tick box CSR exercise on Aberdeen's part either, is it? You know, a lot of people have got a CSR, corporate social responsibility box, and they tick it and go, you know, we're running a charity event, or we're sponsoring a roundabout, or whatever. You know,
or we painted a wall in a school.
Exactly, whatever the lowest CSR might be. You know, for Aberdeen asset management, or is it Aberdeen Asset Management? Yeah.
Aberdeen Standard Investments, yeah.
Sorry, I'll give them the right name because they deserve the shout out. Aberdeen Standard Investment, to do that, financially, that's detrimental to them and their sort of investment portfolio. But it's absolutely the right thing to do. And what I'd like to see happen is more and more people choosing Aberdeen for their investment portfolios, because they deserve the credit for that. So people look and go, where am I going to invest my portfolio? It's a pension plan, or it's your own investments, or whatever, because that's a really, really positive stand that you wouldn't necessarily have drawn the connection with. The bit I wanted to pick up on what Precious said there about the throwaway, you know, cheap £1 t-shirt. What about the environmental impact on landfill and stuff? These, you know, the whole thing structured towards, you know, badly made under sweatshop conditions in Leicester, of all places, by the way. We're not even talking Bangladesh, where it's wrong as well, by the way, as you say. But in Leicester, sweatshop conditions, cheap product, throwaway disposable kind of usage, and then the impact on the environment. None of that is good. None of that ticks any boxes.
No. Yeah. No. Well said. Sarah, can I just ask you to invite you to say something on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's really sad in this day and age that exploitation like that's happening anywhere in the world. I think what will be interesting to see once this investigation's taken place is how many other franchises and big names like that get kind of undiscovered for doing very similar things. There's very similar business models out there that started around the same time as Boohoo, so it'll be interesting to see if anything else gets undiscovered.
And if Boohoo senior management leave and set up, you know, competition, which often happens, doesn't it? When businesses grow, the senior management team go, I'll go and do this myself. They've only got one practice to follow, haven't they? I love that analogy. There's rarely one cockroach in the kitchen. I've never heard that. Brilliant. So I might get that on a t-shirt, but I'll pay full price for it. I'll see that it's made under the right conditions. But you know, there's rarely one cockroach in the kitchen. It's a fabulous phrase. I think it encompasses a lot of things we've talked about in this session, really.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I think so. And thank you so much. That I am going to start to sort of wind that up now. I'm really pleased with the quality of debate. Thank you so much for, you've obviously done an awful lot of research to bring to the table. We've got some really good points. I am going to briefly attempt to draw some of the key points for me as I wrote them down. We talked about heroes and villains today on the COVID-19. Mike Ashley being a case in point, perhaps the unacceptable face of capitalism in 2020. 0 hours contracts came out of that, bullying culture, the audacity to claim key workers. And thank heavens we have actually found out who the real key workers are, who we actually need to keep the economy running. And would you believe it? They're not CEOs of FTSE 100 companies. That's been a really interesting takeaway for me. We've also, Precious went on to talk about the blame culture resulting from the PHE's handling of the COVID-19 crisis in the various jurisdictions around the world, and the leadership highlighted. I beg your pardon, Nick, you went on to talk about Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand and the great leadership, the face of leadership, but acting, positive, responding, 102 days without a case, and then lockdown because something that's really active leadership, that's really leading from the front. And I love that. Precious, we talked about that blame culture with the PHE, a lack of decision making, the mixed messages. So it started out really, really well, but it tailed off pretty sharply, with the decision making, the mixed messages, stay alert, control. What does that even mean? So I can't believe that these people aren't surrounded with really clever people who really should be kind of testing that. We talk about alignment of organizations, and I know the work that I've done with my clients, and I'm sure you have with your clients. Alignment of an organization is the hallmark of all organizations, be they political, be they commercial, or even charitable. Alignment of messages at the very top of the table, right down to the coalface, the salespeople, the marketing people, customer service. Alignment is really, really central to all of that. We went on to talk with Sarah, who brought Amazon, the good side and the not so good side to the table. We talked about all the good things that they've done, pumping 21 million euros into the EU workforce to help them cope with COVID-19. But and actually you just brought it all to the fore in one single sentence, if I may say so, Sarah, on the sentence that you talked about in terms, I need to feed my child. My goodness me, that was the poke in the eye, I think.
Yeah.
Completely.
That's what it all boils down to. The villainous side, the not so good side, is the price gouging, which I think is Amazon's equivalent of data, Cambridge Analytica, all of that. They're allowing it to go on in their platform, and more needs to be done. Nick, not so much wondered, but dived straight in. Tax payments. I'd be very happy to do 20 more of these just on corporate tax payments. We haven't got time for that, but an effective tax rate of 0.0015% should raise your eyebrows even a quarter of an inch. And then I've talked about Boohoo. Now, Boohoo, they've stressed it wasn't them, wasn't us, Gov. It was somewhere in our supply chain. Well, shame on you. It's your business, you're profiting from that behavior, and it's cost you their market, it's a third of their market cap this year, but unfortunately have already made very fabulously profited from this over the last 4 years until it was uncovered. So corporate behavior, corporate greed is really coming to the surface for me. Is there anything that I've missed out? Would anyone like to come in just before I kind of close this off completely?
I do want to say something, Keith. I think you've covered everything really well. I did want to take away the gloom completely. There were heroes that I didn't mention in that whole public health. Local authorities running, food banks, hubs, well-being services, even local charities, churches, they've played a fundamental role in society. Everything that we talked about corporate, but actually the backbone of keeping the society fed, cared for, all that. I have to give credit to those organizations.
I'd say that on a localized level as well. I think it was David Cameron who was looking at big, what we used to phrase, where we were all supposed to get involved in local, it was called Big something, or the initiative in about 2011. Big Society, thank you, I'd forgot. I think COVID-19 has created big society, not accidentally, but you look at any village, any small town, any sort of conurbation, and people just roll their sleeves up and help neighbours, and like churches, community groups, charities. It's been fantastic to see. I would like to think it's created something that we can build on. You don't know. Fingers crossed it will have done.
Yeah,
I agree.
Sarah, is there anything else you'd like to say?
No, I've got nothing else to add. No, I think all of the main points have been covered. And just to mirror what you've said there about society mucking in, I think it's incredible that something so terrible has pulled something so positive out. But yeah, that's been brilliant to see.
It's had a hugely, almost galvanizing effect on the population worldwide. I really am finishing up now. I would like to see, from a personal comment, some sort of new contract between business, people, the public sector and government, such that maybe we can learn some great things out of this. We've talked about many of them here. In terms of diminishing that, reducing that gap and reducing the inequality of society, a very big subject, but I hope we've gone some way to addressing some of those points now. Thank you, Precious. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Nick, for contributing in such a major way. And I really look forward to doing another one of these really, really soon. And thank you for watching. All the best.